us towards the encounters we might have with the most transformative individuals. Um, in MPG, we have groundbreaking ideas, we have life changing experiences, we have unwavering dedication that is rooted in our singular mission to leave an enduring impact and redefine our collective narrative. We all know how the narrative on Africans and Africans of or Africans of or people in the diaspora, blacks of African descent, has been crafted in a way that shows us always in a negative light. But MPG is out to change that narrative. If you've ever dreamt of being a part of a team that creates a meaningful impact on the world, or you want to unlock your full potential, or perhaps you've recently arrived into this vibrant city of Boston and you are eager to explore all it has to offer. You could be a student seeking like minded peers to support you in your new chapter. You could be a mid level professional who has had time in a career role or job function and you want to pivot. MPG is a place to help you become an integral part of this remarkable movement. I would say here dreams are realized, potential is maximized, and narratives are rewritten. I'll briefly talk about MPG's purpose, which is empowering African professionals in the diaspora to evolve into exceptional leaders through the promotion of self awareness and personal growth. And personal growth is one of the things we'll be speaking about during this fireside chat. The opportunities that are provided by MPG enrich both personal experiences and expand your professional networks, and it helps you uncover uncharted areas of your identity, all underscored by our commitment to serve our community. In terms of the vision of NPG, it's to build a collaborative community of Nigerians or Africans in the diaspora and help them develop to become members of the global community. So we're all about building global leaders, if that helps. Um, I will say at this point, maybe we'll talk about a few housekeeping items. This event is being recorded. By law, we should inform everyone. Please put your mic on mute if you're not speaking. And for those of us that have questions, there will be a question and answer session at the end. Please type in your question in the chat box. At this point, I would say we want to introduce our guest speaker. I'm so excited to introduce Adesua on the call. So whilst the slide is coming up to show Adesua, I would just briefly talk about her based on what I've known over the years. Um, Maybe I'll give a moment for that to pop up. So Adesua has over a decade of experience in building career equity, and she helps individuals understand how to navigate their career journey. She's an expert in personal branding, and she's a thought leader in the purpose-driven career leadership industry vertical. She'll be sharing with us tips on how to maximize our career experience and empower us to take our careers to the next level. Currently, she is the chairperson of Student Relations and Scholarship at Nigerian Professional Group and also the Director of Career Equity and Access at Suffolk University. She's also a founder of Hey Mama Career Services. She's an equity and access advocate focused solely on education, aside other interests. This work prepares job candidates for the workforce through careful career exploration and job search training. With her experience as a success coach and academic advisor, she promotes inclusive workplace practices because she believes in the potential of candidates and professionals to drive meaningful change in society. So at this point, maybe I'll say Adesua, welcome. Thank you for joining. You want to say a few words in a few seconds by yourself before we progress?
Thank you so much, Joy. It's a pleasure to be introduced by my birthday mates. And so it's a joy to be a part of NPG and to share my knowledge, experience, and possibly advice, as well as learn from you all today. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Great. So we could start this session maybe by a very important topic that is dear to my heart, and that's something that I know that you have expertise in: personal branding. In today's world, everyone is a brand. Much of our success depends on our ability to persuade people and our ability to allow others see our value. If it's job, if it's a leadership position, even in dating, it's all about our brand. Now, personal brand is more like a cliche today because it's almost like what everyone talks about is necessary, but we don't know how to go about it. We know we have to be intentional, we know we have to be strategic, but how can we define our value? Thank God we have an expert here, Adesua. I would say, Ade, as an expert in personal branding, what are the key must-haves we should think about when we think about this all-important topic?
Absolutely. I'll share a quick slide. Lillian, I'm not sure if you saw my message. If you can give me co-host privilege, I would share some slides just to give some tips. For me, when I think about personal branding, I think about a story, right? And so when we think about what we want people to remember us, we're thinking about what is it that they want, that we want them to remember about us, right? So when I think about branding, I think about an image. So if I show an image, do I have the, thank you very much. If I show this image, how many people know who this is? Just kidding. I bet everybody knows.
Yeah, I do.
Right? So we all know this is Rihanna, but we also know that Rihanna is a brand in herself, right? And so when you think about that, what is it that you know about this person? What is it that you know about their product you do? And that is personal branding. So when I think about personal branding, I think about what's your image. And when I mean your image, I'm talking about your online presence, right? Because when we think about our online presence, we're thinking, how do people know us? And in today's world, LinkedIn is a place where I call LinkedIn the Facebook for professionals, right? Maybe like the Instagram or the TikTok for professionals. What do they know you for, right? What are your skills? What is your story? What do people associate with you? What kind of expertise do you have? So Joy talks about my expertise in the career coaching field. As a career coach, how do I support people? So if you go on my LinkedIn page, would that support what you see on there as a career coach? If I tell you that I am into marketing, if you go to my page, will what you will see the support that message? And so when we think about this, please always think about, what do we want people to know about us? How are we showing it? I mean, today's world, you cannot discount the online presence. But the online presence is just one form of personal branding.
Yeah.
There are other ways you can personally brand yourself. Meeting people in person. When you meet someone in person, how do you introduce yourself? How do you introduce your skills? If you say to yourself, when I leave this conversation, I want this person to remember X about me, how do you share that thing that you want that person to remember about you when you leave there? How do you carry yourself? How do you dress? I know in today's world, people think, oh, how I portray myself, how I dress doesn't really matter, and it shouldn't matter. Yes, but you don't live in a perfect world. If you go to a networking event, you're not going to dress the same way as if you're going to church, right? And it's the same thing as if you show up to an interview. When you show up to an interview, what is the image that you want to portray? And I know we'll talk about interviewing and all of that, but just to think about branding, I just want to leave you with these things of branding is about an image, it's about a story, it's about online presence, and it's about your expertise.
Absolutely, absolutely. I love the way you wrapped it up. It's about image, it's about the story, your presence and expertise. There is a popular saying that Jeff Bezos says. Jeff Bezos is the founder of, I think, Amazon. He says, your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. That's very critical because how we manage our brand benefits us. So I have a follow-on question, if you don't mind, Ade. For a job audit, we talk about job audits, auditing our personal brand equity. It's essential. Again, we keep hearing people tell us what to do. The question is, how do we do it? How do we catalog our credentials, our education, our achievements, our personal experiences, and what we've done that we can transfer into our personal brand? How do we do this?
So one tool that you can use is a resume. One of the, you would expect that for someone who's a career coach, when I edit other people's resume or work with other people, it's easy. But when it comes to editing my own resume, it takes me hours to edit my resume because it's the same thing, right? We've all done so many things. We've accomplished a lot, right? However, when you talk about branding, you're not going to talk about every single thing that you've done in your life. It's just not possible. So what you do is when I think about, I'll break it into some pieces that can be bite-sized. I start with resumes, right? So you have what I'll call a master resume. A master resume is everything that you've done when you were in high school selling or making phone calls for people. That's your intro to entrepreneurship, right? I don't know how many people grew up in Nigeria, but I realized that my first intro to business was when I used to use my cell phone to make calls for people and making money. That was my intro to entrepreneurship. Um, when you did a sport, right, you gain leadership skills. When you completed a project, you gain project management skills. So when you think about all those things, you put all those things in a resume. So now you have your master resume. But you're not going to be sending your master resume out to people for a job. Otherwise, when you have 2 to 3 pages, nobody wants to read that. So I always encourage students, now you're going to look at the job description. And this is where you're going to do a match. What do I need to show on my resume that tells the story of who I am, that allows this interviewer to invite me in to have a conversation with them, right? I think of it like dating. You know how you create your profile, your online dating profile? It's the same thing you're doing with a resume. What you're doing is you want to put enough information on there that shows this person, oh, this is someone I want to talk to. This is someone that has the skills that I'm looking for, that has the experience that I'm looking for, that has the activities that I would appreciate, right? And so that's one way of resume. Another way you tell your story of personal branding, again, is I mentioned earlier, LinkedIn. It's what is the story that you're telling on LinkedIn? How do you engage there? What do people know you for there? Then for some people who are in the ads and they have portfolios. You can use your portfolio as your branding page. I actually think that if anybody is in the creatives, if you're in arts and marketing and you don't have a portfolio, you're doing yourself a disservice because you can always put the link to your portfolio on your resume, on your LinkedIn, so that people can have access and take a look at it. If you're in the sciences, you want to showcase the skills that you have in the sciences that makes you stand out from other people. So I'll just stop there for now. I know that we can talk about personal branding and ways to highlight oneself in different ways.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ade. That was very helpful. I want to jump to another topic because of in the interest of time, because we have a lot to talk about. Self-discovery and goal setting. It's been said that doubt kills more dreams than failure ever will. Now, we keep talking about the concept of dual awareness, how we are aware of our external environment, our internal environment. How do we go about the process of crafting our long term goals, our short term goals, particularly because in the job search, we have our interests. I want to be a musician, I want to be a singer, but I also want to make money. I want to help people on tours, but I also have to make money. Some jobs give me more money, some jobs pursues my interest. How do I craft that and align both of them together? I know you're smiling, there's so much to cover here. Let's start with that.
I'm smiling because I'm like, whoa, how much time do we have? But there are two simple ways that we can break this down. We can break this down into a values and interest exercise. We can break this down into goal setting, right? So when you think about goal setting, I know a lot of people have heard of SMART goals. And if you haven't, please just Google it. I love the visuals when talking about SMART goals because it just helps you sort of like make a plan and see what's realistic, right? When a few years ago, I and this is not actually related to career, but it's about goal setting. And I'll just give that example and you can adjust it as you want. So when I wanted to purchase an item, and it was a big purchase item, and I've always wanted to buy this thing. But somebody said to me one day, like, you know the Nigerian saying, he who fails to plan plans to fail.
Mhm.
And if you have a goal and it's not a SMART goal, it's a dream.
That's right.
And I was like, ouch. Because I've always had this goal. I was like, I'm going to buy this thing. I'm going to buy this thing. But that's what I kept saying. I'm going to. And it was like, oh, so when exactly are you going to buy it? Okay, time bound. I had to put a time to it. And I had to say to myself, okay, I had to look at the logistics. And then I thought, whoa, based on the logistics, I'm not going to be able to buy this thing until 2.5 years from now.
Mhm.
And that scared me. I was like, wait, what? 2.5 years? That's forever. But then I said to myself, if you start today, when you wake up tomorrow, you have day one out of the first 365 that you would check off. And I was like, okay, I'm writing this down. I'm starting today. And then I thought about like, okay, is it realistic for me to be able to buy this thing? Do I have the money? That's the first thing, right? I was like, okay, I don't have the money today, but if I start saving X amount of dollars, I will be able to save this amount of money by 2.5 years. I wrote that down. It became realistic because I knew how much I would need to save every month for that. Then I thought about how would this be attainable? What do I need to make this a reality? I thought about, okay, I'll break it into 4 parts. I wrote it down. When I wrote those things down, I looked at the time frame. I looked at how realistic my savings were. It worked on there. Measurable. Okay, how do I make this goal measurable? Okay, I know that if I save X amount of time, I do this in this amount of time, by 6 months, this is where I should be, right? Okay, it became measurable. And the minute I wrote that goal down, I wrote those steps down, it became specific. It wasn't this thing of like, oh, I want to do this thing in the future anymore. It became, I'm going to do this thing in 2.5 years. And believe me when I tell you, like, it was hard. And there were days I was like, God, come on now. There are people who just wake up in their sleep and do this thing. But I was like, okay, I felt like God was telling me, that's not you. That's not your story. You have a plan. And I said to myself, I can only abort this plan if I come up with a better one. Unless I come up with a better one, I'm sticking to the one I created. So if you think about it in terms of career-wise, it's the same thing. Sometimes we're like, oh, I want to get this master's degree. Well, what are you going to do to get the master's degree? You're not going to get the master's degree in your sleep. How are you going to plan for it? And then that's about SMART goal. It's the same thing as I want to become a CEO. I want to get the first entry-level job. And I know there are a lot of students on here. And I work with a lot of students, whether in my private practice and my day job. And students will tell me like, hey, Ade, I want to get this as a first job. And I asked, okay, what do you need to do from today to the day you graduate that you get this first job? And sometimes people don't realize that you can start planning for your first job out of college the day you start college, right? It feels like 4 years, but guess what? Think about what you were doing 4 years ago and how we got here. Time flies by quickly. And when you break things down, it becomes easier to achieve because you can put check marks of like, hey, if I decide that I want to get into an industry where I don't know anybody, what will I do? Well, first of all, I'm going to go into LinkedIn and I'm going to type in about that industry. I'm going to look at everything I need to know about that industry. I'm going to know who works in that industry. I'm going to look who from my university works in that industry. Do I know somebody that knows somebody that works in that industry? Okay, how many people do I want to contact? Do I want to contact 20 people? How many can I contact in a week? How many conversations can I have? When I do that, what will I have as my summary? And then how do I begin to make a transition? You see how I just talked about all these things? It's not something you do in one day. It's something that you plan for. But now I'm going to back up several steps before we get there. You started with, we all have dreams, we all have goals, we have things that we love, but we also need to make money. Then let's talk about values, right? So if I share with you, I think I have a slide. See if I can pull the slide up. Okay, here we go. All right. So for some of us, we have to ask ourselves, what are our values, right? So if you look on the slide, my values, and this is not an extensive list. This is just a screenshot that I use as examples for people. So my personal values are income, helping society, helping others. And when you think about jobs that align with helping society, helping others, they are not the top paying jobs, right? And then you add income. It's like, ooh, these two things that will butt heads. One of the first things that I learned in my professional career is that income and a salary are two different things. Yeah. A salary is one form of income. It's not all of it. So there are people, when I work with students, who would tell me like, Adi, I really want to do this thing, but I'm not going to make a whole lot of money. And so I'm worried about that. And I'm like, okay, let's talk about how much money do you need to survive? The amount of money that I need is not the amount of money that you need, right? And let's talk about income. There are many ways to make money, but your job is going to be one way. You have the ability to make money in other ways, right? So you talked about me being a businesswoman and still having a full-time job. It does something for me, right? It allows me to pursue my passion in a different way. It also allows me to bring in additional income, right? And I am not preaching that everyone should go out there and have like 10 side hustles like you hear on social media. Like, no, I am not one of those people. I'm just sharing that there are multiple ways to make an income. A salary is just one way. And when you know what your values are, it allows you to center yourself. When I knew that my value was about helping other people and helping society, it then allowed me to think, okay, if I want to prioritize these values, how do I still maintain the top two values and allow myself to have a decent income? For some other people, they love careers where they take risk. There are people who talk about working outdoors. I will admit, I'm the kind of person where if somebody needs to nail something on the wall, I'm going to call somebody and say, hey, come get this done. But there are people who love to work with their hands, right?
Yeah.
And today, society, if you are a plumber, you're going to make more money than a college professor, just say.
That's correct.
So again, I'm not going to say because I want to make money, I'm going to go start plumbing. It's just not my forte. I am not going to be successful in it. So I think about what are my values and how I can be successful, aligning my values with work. And then I'll talk
Absolutely.
about interest and then we'll swap, we'll pivot a bit. So last thing I'll talk about interest. A lot of people have multiple interests. And we want to think about how do our interests align with our strengths, our weaknesses, and our skills. If you are a college student, there are assessments that you can do on your campus that can help you articulate your skills. I feel like a lot of people know what their skills are, know what their interests are, but sometimes it's hard for them to articulate it. There are a lot of assessments that can help you articulate it, but you can also start informally. Just start thinking, what do I enjoy? What am I good at, right? Like I just shared with you, I'm not going to be a plumber, even if I know that, hey, it's one way, a really good way to make money. I'm not interested in it. I don't have the skills for it. I know someone who is good at cooking, right? It's a side hustle. I like cooking for myself, but I don't want to cook for 20 people, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not going to make money doing that. There are people who are very good with technical skills. There are people who are very good with coaching people. There are people who are very good in supporting the work that other people do. Not everybody's going to be a CEO. I know sometimes we get shamed if we are not running a business. And I'm like, you know that 80% of businesses fail. So not everyone is going to be a CEO. If you also are stuck thinking about your interests, your values, your skills, ask people who know you, what do you think I'm good at? If you had to describe me, because people who know you also observe you, and they can also share with you those things that they witness, those things that they're good at. Like a lot of people would tell me that I'm a very good cheerleader, not the cheerleader that draws the pump and I can't jump, no. But like I'm very good at hyping people. Like if you need a hype woman, I am going to make you feel like, hey, you can do anything, you can walk on water, right? I'm a good hype woman. So again, think about those things and then pivot with everything we've talked about. Your values, your interests, your skills, your everything, right? And then think about how it aligns with the career paths that you're choosing. And I'll end with this. I worked with a student once who took an assessment and we looked at the assessment results and she kept telling me like, oh, Adi, that doesn't define me. That doesn't define me. I'm like, wait, you told me you like interior design. You told me you like art. This kind of defines you. And the student was like, oh, but it's not going to make money. I'm like, okay, so it does define you, but you're just scared that it's not going to make money. So how do we make money? So there are so many ways you can break things down to see the places where you're stuck, to see where you can gain alignment. And those are the things that I do help people with in coaching, but I know that we only have an hour, so we're not going to talk about all of it today. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Ade. That was very in depth. I had a full on question, but you touched on it very quickly. If you have questions, please use the chat bar. It's right below. Just type in your chat for any questions you have, and we could go on from there. Very quickly, I want to talk about our strengths. If you can touch on it in a few seconds before we move on to professional networking. How do we find our strengths? After
It's
aligning
pretty
that matrix you talked about, how do we identify our strengths?
it's pretty much what I just shared, right? What are you good at? What are you good at helps you with the strengths. And there are different strengths that we have, right? We have our academic strengths. Some people are very good at math. Um, Not me, but I'm good at writing, right? So I know that as my strength. So I'm not going to go apply for a job as an accountant. I'm not going to go study accounting because I'm not going to enjoy it, right? Some people have very technical skills, like they can break down projects, concepts to very understandable ways. I was having a conversation with someone and we're talking about an event that we're going to host. And I was explaining it, and one lady was like, I think I need to sit and just digest this. Someone else was like, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do this. I was like, aptly said. She just took everything that I was saying and just put it in 3 layers. That's a project manager right there, right? You
Absolutely.
can take a concept and you can break it down. You know what you're good at, right? I can come up with a very big plan and I can say, let's do this thing. And someone else can be in the weeds of like, how are we going to go from point A to point B? If you think about strengths, there's something called Clifton Strengths. So for the college students in the room, please connect with your career centers to do something like a Clifton Strengths, because it can help you not only, again, articulate those skills, but it can help you in your job search. It can help you in your interviews on how you break down your strengths. So I'll give you an example of Clifton Strengths of mine. It's called deliberative. So deliberative, I used to think that this strength of mine was a negative thing until I actually learned that it was a strength. So a deliberative is the person who, you know how you're planning something with somebody and the person is like, what if A doesn't work? What if B doesn't work? And you're sort of like, oh my gosh, are you the Debbie Downer? I realized it was a strength because I'm the one who's always going, okay, we have this plan. If A doesn't work, how are we going to have B? Like, what's the backup for the backup for the backup, right? It was when I realized that it was a strength, that's when I started using it in interviews. So somebody would ask me, what are your strengths? I'm like, hey, I'm the kind of person when we have a plan, we need to have backup. So I'm the girl who's going to ask you for your backup plan, the second backup plan, the third backup plan. When I was a manager, I was the person who was like, hey, we're going to do this. If we can't do this, what are we doing after that? And if we don't do that, what are we? So I'm the person who comes up with a backup plan to make sure that if something goes wrong in a project, there's something that just feels it. That when people look at it, people are like, oh, this thing went on smoothly. They didn't realize that things that that could have gone wrong had backups. So you can do assessments to understand your strengths. You can, if you already can articulate it, align it with your career, or you ask people who know you if those things align.
Thank you, Ade. That's very helpful. I really appreciate you touching on that. I'll be moving on to another important topic almost everyone talks about: the importance of building a professional network. Now, we all know about networking, it's a buzzword every day. What's your take on the fact that research says it's not about the quantity of people you meet, let's say in a room, or the quantity of people you know, or the quality of in depth relationships you've formed over time? Tell us about that. And whilst you're doing that, please also talk about the fact that we tend to always want to do everything at the same time for everyone. How can we create a way where we can say, I'm going to do this ABC, but I want to make sure it's effective. I want to make sure it works. I reach out to people, they ghost me. How can I build that one-on-one in-depth connection in a world that's so distracted?
Thank you. There's a dictionary definition of networking that I just love. And it's very simple because sometimes we overcomplicate it. It says, according to the Oxford Dictionary, it says the act or process of interacting with others to exchange information and develop professional or social contacts, right?
Yeah.
And it's not that complicated, but it is. So how do we break it down? So think about a few things. I think about if you're going to network, there are 3 things to just keep in mind. Networking is about people. It's about having a need. It's about relationships. So there are people who think that, Joy, if I introduce myself to you one time, you were supposed to come and just solve all my problems. You're supposed to just give me a job because, you work at Google. And I said hello to you. That's all I said. You know me now, right? So I'm sorry, there's noise outside. Why don't you just help me out? And I always use that analogy of dating, right? I say, you create this profile, which is your brand, right? Your resume, and you send it out there. And someone looks at it and they're like, ooh, I like this person's picture. I like this person's skills, their qualities. I'm going to ask them on a date. And you go on a date. When you go on a date, what do? You get to know the person as much as the person gets to know you.
Mhm.
If you arrive on a date and you're the only one who does all the talking, by the time you leave, what have you learned about the other person? Nothing. If you go on a date and there's no synergy between the both of you, what happens? You get ghosted, or you don't get any call back, right? Or it fizzles out. It's the same thing with networking, right?
Yeah.
And you're not going to build a relationship with everybody. It's just not going to happen. And not everybody's going to like you. I mean, I don't worry about that because I don't like everybody. I know that's not a cool thing to say, but I don't think that everybody's going to like me either. There are some people who don't know me, and people don't realize that I'm a very shy person. So sometimes when people see me talking to a friend or somebody I know, they're like, oh, she's so bubbly. But when I spoke to her, she wasn't very bubbly. But I'm like, but I don't know you. If I don't know you, I'm not just going to be all excited. But if I know you, I can talk to you forever, right? So when you go into a networking situation, whether you're networking on Zoom, whether you're networking in person, create an agenda. Why are you going into this situation? Why are you going into this conversation? What do you want to gain? Identify at least one thing.
Yeah.
And that one thing could be, I want Joy to leave this conversation knowing about my passion for the banking industry. It could be just one thing that you want. Or it could be, I want Joy to know that I am looking for work without making it his responsibility to look for work for me. How do I do this? When I go in there, I would ask Joy for advice. I will not ask Joy to look for work for me. I will say to Joy, I love that you are in the banking industry. I am trying to get into the banking industry. Can you give me advice for how I can set myself apart? See how I just told Joy I'm looking for work. I want to get in the banking industry, but I'm not like, Joy, look for work for me, right?
Yeah.
And you never go into a conversation. And one of the things that I see with especially college students, and sometimes I see this too, even with other folks who are not in college, when they ask you for your time, right? They are so humble. They are like, oh, I asked Joy for 30 minutes. So I'm going to let Joy just talk for 30 minutes. I'm going to ask Joy questions. But then I'm like, so what does Joy know about you now? And they're like, but we only had 30 minutes. I'm like, no, that's not how it works. Remember, it's a conversation. So when you're going to go meet Joy, you're going to plan some questions that you want to ask Joy. But you're going to start with introducing yourself, why you sought this meeting. And when you're ending, you're going to, I do this thing when I do presentations. I'll say, if you forget anything about what I said today, I want you to remember 3 things, right? If I'm going into a conversation, I'll write down, what do I want this person to remember? And when I'm wrapping up the conversation and saying thank you, I'm going to say, Joy, it was such a pleasure to chat with you. Thank you for giving me your time. Thank you for advising me as to how to set myself apart in my job search. Again, if I went in to hammer, I'm looking for work, I'm going to figure out a way to put that in there, right?
Yeah.
And once you've had that first conversation, that first meeting, you're not going to leave it there. That was just the first meeting. That was the vibe check. After that first meeting, what did you learn about this person? And how can you follow up? Is it a monthly email to check in with the person? Is it a person who you really had a good vibe with that you want to say, can we have coffee some other time, right? Is it a person who you're like, I don't think this is someone I'm going to check in with often, but I'm going to give the person updates, right?
Yep.
I'll share an example of a student I was really close to when they were in college. If this person needed a recommendation, they'll message me. If this person needed advice, they'll message me. Not once did this person ever come back to say, after they got a job, hey, Ade, based on our conversations, I got the job. Hooray! I just want to share with you. This person never followed up with any request that they asked. It got to a point, a year after they had graduated, and they asked me for something. I was like, okay, that's how we're going to have this. Be just like you, take. I sent them a whole list of stuff to do. And I was like, if they do that, I'll continue to help them. And they never responded. And it was just a case of like, hey, we were cool, but you turned this into, I need this from you, do this for me. I need this, do this for me. It's no longer a relationship. Now it's you needing something, and it's only when you need something that you come to the person. I can talk about networking forever.
That's so important. I
And
have to
we'll
stop you
keep
there. I know
talking about it.
you have such depth, Ade, and I have to stop there. I love the fact you brought up the issue. Networking isn't about taking, it's also about giving. It's a two-way street. Thank you for that. I'll quickly talk about virtual networking. Is the new reality we are living with. Now, research says post COVID, over 80% of employers would use a form of virtual interview. It could be a mix of in person and a combination with online strategies, but you just know you're going to have a virtual interview and that number is going to keep growing. What can you tell us about preparing for the virtual interview? Because for any job we're going for, we will be sure we would have that at our fingertips. We want to talk about the risk of tech issues, distractions. What else can you tell us? Especially the pressure compared to in person.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for wrapping this in there, because the pandemic changed a lot of things. Even though virtual interviewing and networking was already happening before the pandemic, I think with the pandemic, it forced us to use the virtual space a lot more than we otherwise would have. And I'll combine both, like networking and interviewing, because there are some areas that I want people to keep in mind. It amazes me. I think, again, I like to be very careful in how I advise people, because I know that my priorities and my values are not the same as other people, right?
Yeah.
But also, I also think about the ethics of what I do. And the ethics of what I do requires me to think of, if I give you advice, right? Is this advice that could harm you? Or is this advice that could be helpful? And I'll give an example. There were people who were saying, oh my gosh, if you go to an interview and you don't feel like turning on your camera, you don't have to turn on your camera.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't give that advice, and I'll tell you why. If I come into this conversation right now, right, and I had my camera turned off the whole time, can you imagine how awkward that would be?
Absolutely.
As we're having this conversation. Okay, let aside the awkward conversation. When you are looking for work or when you're networking with someone, you're not in that place. Is it a need or is it a want, right?
Yeah.
I have gone into interviews where I did not need the job. I just wanted the practice of that interview. And so if they hired me, hey, if they did not hire me, okay, whatever. But guess what? When you're coming to an interview, Remember, you're not the only candidate for this job, right?
Yeah.
And if this is a need, right? When you don't turn on your camera, are you able to communicate with the person while your camera is off, right? Because you could have your camera off because of technical issues,
Yep.
because of poor Wi-Fi, because you are in a place that is not conducive. There are people who just come on Zoom, their camera is off. They don't even tell you why their camera is off.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, okay. And I'm like, it's your right to do that, right? But guess what? You are not the only candidate they are interviewing.
Yeah.
If I am interviewing 5 candidates and 4 candidates come on camera and they do very well, maybe you excelled as well, but all 5 candidates were great. Do you think I'm going to hire the candidate who did not turn on the camera or the one who did? It's just simple, right?
One I could connect to my eyes.
Because I'm having an engagement with you. Some people tell me that, oh, not everybody have a conducive space for to turn on their camera. I'm like, if you knew you had an interview, you would go to a place that's conducive. If I'm in my kitchen right now, right? You see how my background is blurred? Because I don't want you looking at my refrigerator, my kitchen stove, and all of that good stuff. But if I did not tell you that I'm in my kitchen, you would not know that I'm in my kitchen, right? I'll blow my background. So because I'm an equity coach and because I think in terms of access and barriers, I think, how do we remove the barriers that would impede your getting a job? I am not disqualifying or dismissing the reasons why you may not turn on your camera. I'm saying, how do we make it that you do not put yourself at risk for not getting that job? Then we talk about how we show up, right? There was a person who did an interview, right? The person was sitting on their bed and their roommates kept coming into the room while they were doing the interview. I'm like, this is the time you tell your roommate, your village people, don't call me between 12 and 1. Don't text me between 12 and 1. In fact, if I'm sharing the bedroom with you, I'm going to tell you, like, listen, take $5, go get ice cream between 12 and 1.
Give me a break.
I don't want to see you, right? Again, I think about things from access barriers. What people wear, people do not realize that, okay, are we supposed to judge someone based on what they're wearing? No, we're not. But guess what? We're human beings. I had someone who did an interview and they did the interview with their phone and they were wearing a t-shirt. And I'm like, damn, that's some confidence that you have there, right? Even when I'm interviewing in my house, listen, I will dress like I am going in person from head to toe because I want to set myself in that mood. Same thing when I'm having conversations with people. I will dress like how I will show up for you. There's some people who are like, oh, that's not a big deal. For me, it is. Remember what I said about branding, right? What's your brand? How do you want people to leave that conversation knowing you? I had a conversation with someone because she had that phone and that t-shirt. It was distracting for me the whole time.
Yeah.
I thought they were a great candidate, but I just kept thinking about the distraction. And again, they did not even mention anything. But here's one thing, practice what you preach. I had an interview one day. You know how some days they're like, if you're Nigerian, you understand this joke. They're like, your village people came that day. That day, my computer died an hour before the interview. I was like, what is going on? I had to interview on my phone. And because I'm in my kitchen, there's a way the light sets up.
Yeah.
So if I turn this off right now, depending on how I set my computer, it feels like there's a halo on my head. You
Right over
see the
you.
halo with my hand right there right now?
Yeah.
It felt like the halo was on my head. And so they could barely see my face. You know what I did? I said to the interviewer, I said, I know this looks distracting right now, but I need you to understand what happened. My computer died just before this interview started, but I am a quick thinker. I'm a problem solver, and I wanted to make sure that this interview happened. So I did a quick pivot. I'm talking to you on my phone. The lighting is not the best, but I'm making sure that I am present for you and I'm having this conversation with you. And I appreciate you being understanding of my current situation. You could just see how their body language just changed. They were like, oh, wow, thank you. And thank you for being on your phone and, having this conversation with us because your computer died. I was doing a scholarship interview and there was a girl who her computer died at home. And this girl got on the phone with us and said, you know what, I'm going to run to the nearest cafe. It's about 5 minutes from me, and I'm going to get on with you.
Wow.
I fought hard for that girl to get that scholarship because I was like, she came on and she told us, and she said, I am going to get on with you. I'm going to run. Give me 5 minutes. I was like, take your time. We will wait for you. The fact that she explained her situation showed me that determination that person has, and she was great. Again, so sometimes, communication matters. So I know that was a lot, but I love to have the stories so that people will sometimes know when we say do something, why we're asking you to do it that way, how we're asking you to be prepared, because life will happen even in the best of situations. It's happened to me. I've seen it happen to other people.
Thank you so much. That was helpful. In the interest of time, we have less than 10 minutes. I would allow people, please drop your questions in the chat box. We'll be coming into the questions in the chat box very shortly. I have one question. We have to touch on job strategies. There is a tendency today, Ade, to want to showcase multi skill sets. I am a brand strategist. I am a UX designer. I also paint. I'm also in the healthcare sector. Oh, by the way, if you don't know, I also am very good with engineering. And one more thing, just so you know, I used to be just to try to expand the jobs we could get. Now, so looking at branding, you said branding is about curating your yourself. So when someone thinks about you, they remember something specific, something in terms of focus. Given that the background that in personal branding, focus is essential, we have to align our messaging to be consistent and memorable within a target industry. How do we do that? Does that hurt us? Does that make our brand stronger? Putting multiple skills, various skill sets in maybe our resume or how we present ourselves.
Yeah, this is a very difficult one because sometimes it's you want to show that you're versatile. Sometimes you don't want to pigeonhole yourself into one area. This is how I think of it, and I use this in my personal aspect, and I share with people if it works for them. I think about you can do all things, but you can't do all things at once, right? So I say to people, especially job seekers, I know it can be very challenging when you're looking for work. Like, I never undermine the difficulty of looking for work. I say to people, narrow it down to 3 things. It's easier when you're talking about 3 things than when you're talking about 10, right? You can make a case for 3 things, then you can make a case for 10 things at once. And then when you do 3 things, I think of it this way. Make your resume. If you're going to, say, for example, you want to follow one path, right? Have a resume that follows that path, right? Have 3 resumes so that you are not constantly changing your narrative and story every job you apply to, right? And also tell your brand for each path, right? So it's kind of like, okay, I'm added today the career coach. I'm gonna wear this hat. I have worked in nonprofit. I've worked in higher ed. I've worked in education and nonprofit my entire career. I've never worked in corporate. But guess what? There was a time I applied for a corporate job. I wasn't coming to tell this person that I had worked in a corporate job, but I was like, see, because I've worked in nonprofit and higher ed, this is why it's going to be a benefit for you when I work for your organization, right? I am going to use the experience that I have to get what I need. I don't have to change who I am, but I can be all things to everybody. So it really does help. If you want to narrow things down, narrow it down, build a brand for each of those buckets that you have, and then use that. And when you're looking for work, employ multiple strategies. Some people are ashamed to tell people that they're looking for work. In my book, closed mouths don't get fed. So and I'll end with this story. One guy was out of work. So he went to his son's school game. And so when he was there, another parent asked him, was like, oh, so what do you do for work? And in that moment, he was like, oh man, I don't want to tell this man that I'm out of work right now. But he was just like, you know what? I'm going to see him another day. So I just don't feel like lying. He just said, hey, I'm in between jobs right now. And the guy was like, oh, whoa, my company's hiring. What did you do before? Blah, blah, blah. There and then, see, he was contemplating, should I lie or should I tell the truth? He told the truth and he got a job just from talking to that person who he did not know. Again, we always have to be discerning in our communication, in our spirit. We know that. But sometimes you don't know where your blessing is going to come from. And you can, again, discern who you're sharing what with, but be willing to share.
Thank you, Ade.
I also talk about using job boards, but I also talk about networking a lot, right? And again, I emphasize on the relationship building part of networking and aligning it with job boards. So anytime I apply for a job, right, I would look for someone in that organization to connect with. I will look for somebody who knows somebody in that organization for me to have a conversation with. If you can narrow it down to the team itself, it's great. It doesn't have to be the hiring manager. If you can have a conversation with the hiring manager, great. But you can even talk to somebody who is not a hiring manager just to get a sense of like, hey, what am I walking into? Tips that can help me stand out, or a referral. But again, I always tell people, like, if you just met somebody one time, you may want to discern whether you should ask for a referral or not.
Yeah.
But if you feel like you bonded, the person is willing to help you depending on how much you know the person or whose recommendation you're going with, the person could be a referrer. So I have gotten jobs through referral. My brother makes a whole lot of money, more than I do. He has never gotten a job through a referral. He just applies and he gets jobs.
Absolutely.
So I always say, listen, if you can work both, complement each other with those strategies, you'll be all right.
Thank you, Ade. We're right on the hour mark. I only have time for one question, and I'll rush through it. And then I would say, any other person that has a question, please follow NPG. There's an NPG LinkedIn page being shared, and you can reach out to Ade directly. Ade's career service link has also been shared. HeyMamaCareerServices.com. So we have a question from Ifi Umuna right here. He says, "Thank you very much for the knowledge you shared, Ade. I have a bachelor's in biochemistry. I've never fully used the certificate because I had the opportunity to work offshore. Now I am a police officer here in Western Mass. I'm looking to get into CRA. I believe that will be clinical research associate, but I struggle with interviews. How can you advise me? 1 minute a day before we wrap up. Thank you."
Okay. All right. And if the organizers, NPG doesn't mind, I could stay on a few to take on some more questions because I know that we did run out of time. So I will give a few extra minutes. But to answer this person's question, when you talk about being a CRA, I don't know how much you know about this industry. Just because you have a degree in something doesn't mean you know how the job actually functions in day to day. I have seen people who apply for a job because they understood the job they understood the what was put on the resume, on the job description, but they don't understand the day-to-day of that job. They don't understand some of the intricacies. I always ask people, ask somebody who does that job for a living, what do they do? What helps to stand out, right? Especially when you're struggling in interviews, because there may be things that you're leaving off the conversation that could be meaningful. I also don't know how you interview. Sometimes when people go into interviews, they overshare or undershare, right? So I don't know if that is maybe something that may be impacting you. Sometimes there are people who come into interviews and they ask them, do you have any questions for us? And they're like, no. I'm like, how do you go in a job interview and you do not have questions for an interviewer? Remember, it's a two-way street, right? That you want to ask questions. Another thing to also think about is there are people who are very passionate about a specific job, but they haven't done their research in terms of the company that they want to work for or the team that they would love to join. So sometimes those things show. You may really be knowledgeable about the field, but you may not be knowledgeable about the company. So I don't know which areas may be impacting you, but the one tip that I would leave you with is please talk to somebody who is doing that job. Tell them about the challenges that you're having and tell them about how you are currently interviewing to see if there's any disparity or discrepancy. I could say, hey, use my services and charge you and ask you questions, but that's an easier way to get it done.
Thank you, Ade. I appreciate. Any other questions from the interviewers or the participants online for Ade? Okay. Thank you, Ade. I know you wrapped up basically what we talked about. We talked about the importance of networking. We started with the critical need to develop a personal brand and how to build an online presence. We talked about creating and crafting an effective job search strategy. You talked about using the LinkedIn board. You talked about virtual interviews, which is a commonplace in today's world. You talked about the importance of our personal values and interests. And lastly, you talked about how to set goals. It's been very insightful. I've been extremely wowed. I learned a few things here. I know you shared your LinkedIn page. Please, you can follow Ade on LinkedIn. You can also follow Nigerian Professional Group on LinkedIn. The page has been shared. Also, Ade's private professional career service, heymamacareerservice.com, is shared on the group. I want to thank everyone for joining this call today, and I wish us all a great weekend ahead. Thank you, Ade.
Thank you so much, Joy, and thanks NPG, and thanks everyone who came to learn.
Cheers. Bye-bye.